Okay, Constantine and the Roman Empire, and especially this role of bishops and Christian scholarship. What we have in Western civilization is emerging. It's emerging of sort of the Greek, Roman, classical world that reaches deep into that Persian world. And then we also have that the Jewish scriptural scholarship, the scribes, the Ezra type of figures that were supported by the Persian Empire. And then this new Christian vitality where people like Paul are just amazing figures, and they have to work things out. And what I've given you is some readings from Eusebius and Theodoret about bishops. I'll talk about them in a second. I've given you a separate video to help you with the readings, but I'll just give you a quick overview of just what is just an amazingly fruitful and vital time of the intellectual life in Western civilization. And it's largely done between the period of, this guy here, this is Caesar Augustus, and this guy here, which is Caesar Augustus. But we call this guy Constantine. Constantine comes from York or something up in England. Isn't this a great statue of him? I love this statue. This guy's pointing here and that guy's there. And so between these guys, the first 300 years of Christianity, we have a very dynamic development of scholarship. Now, Constantine's up here, and he comes down, and there's a big, long story, and we could go into it. It's fun. But how he takes over the whole thing, okay? And we get this new attempt to unite what had been falling apart, okay? And this is, like I said, about the year 300. And so here's Hal Drake up at UC Santa Barbara, who's written this book, Constantine and the Bishops. And this is this idea that, Constantine had become this, he grabs hold of this image of being an exemplary Christian emperor. Now, how sincere he is has always been debated, but he's very sincere. His mom's Christian, we'll talk about her, and he seems to have become very committed. Eusebius certainly believed, his major bishop believed that he had become committed to God's work, and so we have a lot of bad talk about Constantine because he creates what's a type of Constantinianism, Christendom, or some sort of like political church. And so some people throughout history, there's been varieties of people who've thought that Constantine represents the fall of Christianity, because Christianity is at its best when it's persecuted church. The blood of the martyrs is the best church. Well, for our civilization purposes, we are seeing Constantine as really dynamically important in the development and the infusion of Christianity into what will be the last 100 years, 200 years of the Western Christian Empire, and then the birth of what becomes Europe and everything else. Okay? And who's going to be at the center of this are these bishops, which Constantine relied upon. Okay. As scholarship goes, this is Augustine the bishop here. He's a cardinal. This is Jerome, and Jerome is not a bishop, but Augustine is a bishop. We'll talk more about him. This is the scriptures, these books. You see, you build the church here on top of books, and this is Christianity is a very bookish religion. That's why you have Christian colleges and Sunday school, and we're not meant to just sort of sit around and be mystics. We're not meant to be just sort of therapeutically thinking about self, fulfillment. We are supposed to be a inquiring bunch. And so Christianity has been promotive of science and law and politics and good government and all sorts of things. History, of course, especially. So this is this world of scholarship, and the key figures for us are bishops. And here you have bishops with books. This very early, it's like 150 AD is when you got these bishops with books here. And notice these are codex books. These aren't scrolls. These is that new development. This is high-tech stuff coming out of the Roman period. Now, what happens is we have apostles, we have bishops, We have deacons. These are your primary bunch, and we have elders. These are the sort of leadership bunch that Book of Acts especially sort of lays out for us. The apostles, we tend to limit to a small number of people who worked very closely with Jesus. Paul gets himself into this group, people who had directly been told by Jesus. And it means they're sent ones. They're sort of apostles are like these mobile people. These guys are on the road. Deacons are helping with the poor. Elders are a sort of interesting bunch, a type of senate, which we saw going all the way back in the Old Testament and deeply supported in the Roman. But these guys here are called overseers. That's the root word in Greek, is an overseer. And it's the root word for episcopal, episcopi. These are the church run by bishops, episcopal. And so there's fights over history as though, like I'm a Presbyterian, and elders are Presbyterians in Greek. Episcopalians are bishops in Greek. So who runs the church defines the name of the church. Don't worry about it. There's lots of good fights, lots of good fun throughout Christianity as to what the right way to do things are. But no one denies the role of these bishops in helping Constantine, and especially in helping early Christianity figure itself out. I gave you, John, in the other reading, in the other video, we'll talk more about this, but in the book of Acts, Acts 15, it's a bishop, James, the brother of Jesus, who pulls together the church of Jerusalem. Peter and Paul are there. We've got to figure out some policy issues. We got to write a document. We got to send this document around the Roman Empire. That's what bishops do. So James is our sort of earliest bishop, and then I give you Eusebius and Theodoret as further sort of securing information and stuff like that. But I want to point out what really is so deeply important for Christianity, and it's this notion of reading backwards. A new type of scholarship has to be developed by Christians. And it comes from, like here, is this, this is a statement by Jesus. If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for Moses wrote about me. See, the story of salvation, as our Bible presents it, is a connected story in which sort of things that we think are scholarly impossible, which is that people like Moses wrote about Jesus. I mean, that's like saying George Washington wrote about, Donald Trump. I mean, it's not, it's, we rebel against this. But no, Christianity actually has this deep commitment from the Bible, which is that there's these threads of storyline and stuff like this that are all connected, and they're all connected throughout time. This is what you call prophecy. It's also a way of reading, a way of scholarship. On the road to Emmaus, the first book of Luke just gives us this picture of Jesus on his first encounter with people after the resurrection. And what's he doing? He's giving a history lecture. So Jesus is a historian. Just always think about that. But here's it. Okay, so Jesus says on the road to Emmaus, that he slows down. He says, in the beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in scriptures concerning himself. So this becomes this reading backwards. And so Jesus tells his followers to start learning how to read backwards. And Jesus apparently gives this first lecture. But then, as you know from the book of Acts, is the apostle. One of the reasons deacons are established. These deacons are established to do the practical work is because these people here have to figure out the word. They have to figure out the history, figure out the tradition. So you get like a verse in John 3. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. This is Jesus saying, that he's going to be lifted up like Moses. Well, if you go back to Moses, and Moses put this, basically a stick in the ground with a serpent on it, and everyone looked upon it and healed. So what you have is a precursor, a figure, a type This is the figural language in which Jesus is saying that Moses, was involved in sort of giving a symbol that is going to represent what he does on the cross. Okay? And then you have lines like this, from Paul. The resurrection of the dead comes through a man, for as in Adam all die, so in Christ will we be alive. So there's a bookend type of quality to the story of salvation, the story of Genesis all the way to the Gospels is this through Adam's fall we sin, original sin, where like the whole creation is infected with this problem, and then Jesus comes to end this and offer salvation at his cross. And so the cross becomes this very important Christian symbol from very early on. Used to be that people said, no, it's not till 600 years after. No, the cross is like, central right from the very beginning. So there's this history. So you have to figure out a special kind of history. It's not just history as factoids. Jesus died, Jesus rose again as a fact. People saw him, there's eyewitnesses. It's also, once you know that, you've got to then figure out this whole scriptural history that's going on. It takes a lot of scholarship. And so Christian schools are going to develop out of this. We've already read about these sort of things in Alexandria and Christian liberal arts and what we do at a Christian college. It all comes out of this. So you get what we call a scribal culture, okay? Scribal culture. And scribal culture is this group of bureaucrats who are especially in charge of education. Remember, Aristotle says state's in charge of education, and with Constantine, you get a firming up of the need for bishops, these scholar bishops, to be figuring out issues, taking care of things, and Constantine becomes the person who wants to bring together the faith, and he wants to protect the holy faith that I enjoy, the truth, spread this stuff, and he is going to use bishops to do it. And I give you some readings there, some good evidence from primary sources. They want to figure out Easter. They want to do a lot of things. They figure out the Nicene Creed. I give you, and we'll talk about this, the Holy Scriptures need to be, brought together, put together as a collection. We've got certain books that we all agree on, but then there's these others. Like, what do we do with those? And Eusebius and a number of bishops are involved in trying to figure through those things out. But the rule tends to be for the bishops, what are the churches reading? What are most churches, especially the biggest, the most important churches, most influential churches, reading in their worship? And that becomes our Bible. Now, and this all is pulling together. You see, Christianity is pulling together all that scholarship over 300 years into this time, packed into this time of Constantine with all this support. Now, Constantine is being supported and pushed, and apparently really influenced by his mom. And his mom is Saint Helena, okay? And she is the Augusta. She is the, mother. And if you go hanging around in Europe and stuff, you'll find these oldest churches all have that date around 300, and many of them have to do with Helen, because she, with her son's support, began really pushing for the building of structures. And what they did was they took what's called a basilica. There we go, basilica. And notice it has this apse end with this, where the judge would sit here, and then this is where the assembly or the koinonia would sit here, out here, or stand. And so what you do is you take what is a court, a public building for judicial and meeting house and multiple purpose uses, and put a cross on it, and it's a church. And she, during her time period, they start to really develop this. And the most important church, the most significant church, and I give you a document from Theodora saying how in her old age, Helen really wanted to find the spot where Jesus was buried and rose again. Okay, and so she goes to the Holy Land, and there's Hal Drake actually writes real well about this in his book on the bishops and stuff. But she, pretty much everyone, archaeologists and stuff like this, agree that the site was found. Okay, you can disagree with the resurrection, but the site of the grave, you can, and actually the killing of Jesus is found by Helen, or at least under the auspices of Helen. So this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is in Jerusalem. And we'll talk a little bit more about this history of this church and this site as it goes into the time of later, Charlemagne and such. But what's you have is a basilica form. Okay, see, this is that apse here, and this is where the people stand. There's the basilica form. And then right here is the site where Jesus is crucified on the cross with the two other crosses next to him. And then you see not too far away is the site of the tomb. And so you get this really interesting architecture that develops eventually. I think that just Helen started with this, and then later on the Romans developed this. But I don't, you can find out more about it. I've read about it again. I forget. But the thing is, there's the rotunda's about 30 years later or something. But here's the idea of it: is that underneath here is this tomb structure, which was next to a quarry. Okay, this is all sort of a quarried area. And then later on, I think it's Hadrian builds a temple over the top of it. And then that actually becomes a site where people remember, well, under that temple is where Jesus was buried. So they dig it back up in Helen's time. And that's when the document says they actually found the true cross. Well, that's a fun issue. Maybe, I wouldn't put it past Jesus to want to keep that old cross going. But here, you don't have to believe it. It's not one of those non-essentials out there. But the idea that we actually have the site of the burial and the resurrection. And so what you have is this church, which sits right over here. This is the Dome of the Rock here, where Temple of Solomon was. And this is also the site where traditionally Abraham almost sacrifices Isaac. And then right over there is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus rose from the dead. And so this is a really fun idea, and it needs to be thought of in the same context as Eusebius. What they're trying to do is protect history. They're trying to secure history. They're trying to make history solid and make the connections, make it, because Christianity, before its theology, is history. Paul says the whole religion's bogus unless if Jesus did rise from the dead, the whole religion's bogus. If there's this centrality of the cross and resurrection, that 3 days, that is the fullness of time. That's when it all happens. That's when salvation is made. And then we live in sort of an after time or something now. But that's what these scholars were working on: how to work with time, how to think about time, how to secure information. Because Christianity is not some sort of like airy-fairy, let's float through life, sleep with magnets, way of thinking. This is a scholarly tradition, and this is what makes for Western civilization to be such a scholarly civilization. But it's built around bishops. And so therefore, we're later in the class we will pay specific attention to the Bishop of Rome, who is this creation of the most interesting political office in the world, incredibly powerful with no army or anything else. Guy wears white. He has white ski boots when I was in college. So we'll talk about this development of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, as a political figure later on. But it is Constantine who really increases the power and importance of popes in the way civilization is going to